Hi everyone, welcome back. I hope you're all doing well. So the case that we are covering today, oh my God, it has been on my radar for the longest time now. I also get so many requests to cover today's case, and all I'm going to say is today's case is a lot.
Oh yeah, they call us the kissing cousins.
Today's case focuses on a young woman called Vera Jo Regal. And Vera, she had intellectual disabilities, she was incredibly vulnerable, and she was very easily manipulated, and she ended up living with one of the most disgusting, disturbing families I have ever come across. And in this family, we are talking incest, physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal abuse, bullying, cult-like activity. It is just so messed up.
I raised my kids not to hit a girl, but if they're going to put their self in a man's place, then yeah, then do it.
And the ringleader of this family, of this cult-like family, she has sometimes been referred to as the female Charles Manson, was a woman called Sherry Brooks. And Sherry Brooks and the Brooks family are pure evil. Everything that this woman does makes my blood boil. She makes me so angry.
They took Vera up to the tracks and then they degutted her like a fish and then they left her up there to die. And Shannon said, don't worry about it because she deserved it.
I just don't know how anyone walking this earth can be as evil as Sherry Brooks. And the worst part about this whole case is that she basically got away with everything.
I will make sure that they know that Desta Bixler.
Today's case is a huge miscarriage of justice, and we have a lot to get through. This is a very big case, so let's jump in. So before we get started, I just want to give a huge thank you to today's sponsor, and that is ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN is an app that will keep you safe and secure online. It is super easy to install and use. It works across all devices, including your smartphone. Whenever I am out and about in the world, whenever I'm in a coffee shop, I always make sure that I open up ExpressVPN and tap connect, so I know I am safe and secure when I'm using the internet. Because did you know, when you are out and about using public Wi-Fi, hackers could be out there lurking, trying to steal your information, like your credit card details, personal and private information, your photos, which really freaks me out. So for my security concerned viewers out there, you need to be using ExpressVPN. But there is another huge benefit to using ExpressVPN, because it lets you watch TV shows and movies from all over the world. I have recently been binge watching a series called Kin. It is about an Irish crime family and all of the ins and outs of their family and the troubles that they get into. It's very Peaky Blinders-esque. Like, think of a modern Peaky Blinders, and that is Kin. And it is incredible. It was one of those TV shows that I just wanted to watch the next episode, and I was just like, I can't get enough of this show. You need to go and watch it right now. However, it is not available in the US. But I have a solution for you, because it is available on Netflix UK. So if you are outside of the UK and you can't watch Kin, all you have to do is download ExpressVPN, change your geolocation to the UK, log into your Netflix account, and voila, you can watch both series of Kin. However, if you don't have a Netflix account, you can still watch it, because all you need to do is still change your location to the UK and then go on to BBC iPlayer, where you can watch the two series for free, which is where I originally watched them anyway. And seriously, it's so good. Go and watch Kin right now. Pause this video and go and watch Kin. And if you wanted to try out ExpressVPN for yourself, you can go and get 3 months of ExpressVPN for free by going to expressvpn.com/Danielle, or just go to the link in my description box. So I just want to thank ExpressVPN again for sponsoring today's video, but thank you to every single one of you watching right now, because truly without all of you guys, I wouldn't get opportunities like this. And now let's jump into today's case. Sherry Brooks was born on the 3rd of November 1962, making her a Scorpio, and she grew up in Findlay, Ohio, where the rest of today's case takes place. And we don't know a lot about Sherry's childhood, but we do know some things, and what we do know is just absolutely horrific, because from a very young age, Sherry Brooks was sexually abused, and she was abused by her very own biological father, who was a man named Chuck, and Chuck was an absolute monster. He would physically abuse his wife, so Sherry's mom, but he would also abuse Sherry and all of her siblings. And it is said that when Sherry was born, Chuck would sexually abuse her when she was a baby. And he would sexually abuse her as a baby on a regular basis. And Sherry's mom knew about the abuse, but she never did anything about it. She never stepped in, nothing. Leaving Sherry to be sexually abused in the most horrific ways by this monster. And what just makes this so much more disturbing is that when Chuck was sexually abusing Sherry, he gave her a nickname, which was Sugar Babe. And if that doesn't make your skin crawl, I don't know what will. And what is just like really disturbing to think about is that Sherry would actually go on to like this nickname and use it for herself when she became an adult. There is no doubt in my mind that there is definitely Stockholm Syndrome going on here, and that will become clear throughout this case. And this is what Sherry's life was like during her very early years. And then when Sherry was 3 years old, she finally got taken off of her parents by the state, and Sherry and all of her siblings were placed in foster care, and Sherry stayed in foster care until she was 16 years old. She just bounced around various different families, never really being settled. And from the ages of 3 to 16, when she's in foster care, we don't really have any information about Sherry. We don't know about her experience, apart from obviously she was bouncing around everywhere, but we have no information about what she was doing. But when Sherry is 16 years old, she does finally leave foster care and she moves back in with her mom. And obviously this is the mom that kind of just stood by and allowed her child, her baby, to be sexually abused by her dad. So not exactly the best mom there. And at this point, Sherry had been in foster care for the last 13 years. And I'm not sure if she actually had any kind of contact with her mom over those 13 years. So the fact that she's now moving back in with her mom must have been a very weird, uncomfortable situation. But what makes this just even more uncomfortable and disturbing is that Sherry's dad, Chuck, he was kind of still floating around. Sherry's parents were no longer together in a relationship, but Chuck was still around, which meant that Sherry had to come into contact with her abuser. And as soon as Sherry moved back in with her mom when she was 16, this is when her dad, Chuck, started coming around more again. He wanted to get close to his daughter again, and I think we all know why he wants to get close to his daughter again. He is a creep, he is a monster. Chuck would say that Sherry was his favourite. He would also say that he would do anything that Sherry wanted because, you know, he's a good dad. But he would say this in a flirty way. And I think we all know what he means when he says he will do anything for her. And Sherry loved this attention from her dad. Like I said, there's definitely some Stockholm Syndrome here because she craved his attention. She wanted to please him, even if that meant that he was sexually abusing her because it was the only attention that she was getting from him. And she felt good about it. And again, her dad still called her nickname Sugar Babe. And it's just creepy. It's just creepy as hell. And then it wasn't long after Sherry left foster care that a very significant thing happens in today's case. Because for some strange reason, Sherry became convinced that someone had stolen her baby. Yeah, just let that sink in for a second there. Sherry was convinced that someone in foster care, whilst she was in foster care, had stolen her baby. Sherry started saying to her mom over and over again, "Mom, when I was in foster care, I was pregnant. I gave birth to a baby. I gave birth to a little girl and someone stole it." Now, I just want to point out that this is not true. Sherry was never pregnant. She never gave birth. No one stole her baby. She was making it all up. It was all a lie. The actual truth was that Sherry, when she was in foster care, a girl that she was in foster care with did become pregnant with a little baby girl. And Sherry wanted that little baby girl for herself. So Sherry was lying about this whole situation, hoping to steal someone else's baby. Does all of that make sense? Because it's just bloody confusing. What the actual hell? But Sherry is a habitual liar and she concocted this plan to try and steal someone else's baby. Thankfully, she didn't succeed. But this is very significant to today's case. This whole stealing babies, obsession with babies comes up a lot. So now we get to the point where Sherry is 18 years old, and this is when another very messed up thing happens. Because now Sherry enters into a relationship with her first cousin. I told you there was incest in this case. This case is messy. Sherry entered into a relationship with a man called Danny Bixler Sr., who was the son of her mom's sister, so they are first cousins. In fact, it's said that incestual relationships were actually very, very common in the Brooks family. So this was actually nothing unusual. And the family decided to give Sherry and Danny a little couple nickname. They were called the Kissing Cousins.
Oh yeah, Danny and I they call us the Kissing Cousins.
And it's like, why would you want that nickname? So the two of them, they're dating, they're falling for one another. And then it wasn't long until Sherry became pregnant. Yeah, Sherry is actually pregnant at this point with her cousin's baby. Sherry gave birth to a baby boy who she named Scotty. And Scotty was now Sherry's first of 9 children. So I think it's safe to say that things in Sherry's life have been pretty messed up from the moment she was born. But things now only get worse because it is now where it becomes very obvious that Sherry is a monster herself. Because not long after her new baby boy Scotty was born, Sherry starts to sexually abuse him, just like she was sexually abused as a baby. Sherry is now repeating the behavior that her dad displayed. She is now sexually abusing a baby herself, and it is incredibly distressing to think about. There are even very disturbing reports out there that detail how Sherry used to perform oral sex on her babies. I don't even want to repeat some of the phrases, some of the things that I read, because it's just too much to even think about someone doing that to a baby. And eventually authorities were made aware of the sexual abuse towards Scotty, and thankfully they acted quickly. Scotty was removed promptly from the home, and Scotty was placed in the custody of Sherry's mom, who I've got to say is probably not the best person to be looking after a baby, seeing as they just stood by and allowed somebody else to sexually abuse her children. But hey ho. But what is just the most bizarre and infuriating thing about all of this is that Sherry faced no repercussions. It has been discovered that Sherry is sexually abusing a baby. In what world does someone not end up in prison for that? But Sherry didn't face any repercussions. As far as I'm aware, she didn't even face like a fine or a community sentence. Nothing. All that happened was that Scotty was taken off of her. And I literally want to scream because I'm like, how? If something had been done in this moment, the rest of today's case possibly would not have happened. And what is just so crazy is that Sherry was still allowed visitation to her son, who was obviously at her mother's house. And I'm like, what the actual hell? She should not be allowed within 100 miles of a baby, let alone visitation. And if you think that this is just a one-time thing, Sherry abusing a child, well, you would be wrong. Because in March of 1982, this is not long after Scotty has been removed from her care, Sherry broke up with her first cousin, and she soon entered into another relationship with a man called Mike Maloney, who was a piece of work himself. And Sherry fell head over heels in love with Mike. They were literally married within a few weeks. They moved in together, and it wasn't long until Sherry was pregnant again. They went on to have a baby boy who they named Joshua. And even though it was discovered that Sherry sexually abused her first baby, she was allowed to keep her second. No questions asked. Now, Sherry was supervised by CPS, but she still raised her son in incredibly abusive, terrible conditions. The trailer that the family lived in was absolutely filthy. No one ever cleaned. There was dirt everywhere. Joshua was just placed on the floor with rubbish and dirt and mold everywhere. Joshua was rarely bathed. His clothes were not changed. Sherry also refused to feed Joshua properly. Sherry was eligible for free baby formula. She didn't have to worry about paying for it. But Sherry was too lazy to go and collect the baby formula, so she fed Joshua a newborn baby cow's milk. And if you are not aware, This is incredibly dangerous. Babies are not supposed to be given cow's milk for at least 12 months because it carries a lot of bacteria that is incredibly harmful to a baby. It contains too much protein for their liver to process, and giving a baby cow's milk can cause intestinal bleeding. But of course, Sherry didn't care about any of this, and clearly CPS didn't care about it either. So when Joshua was 3 months old, he was an incredibly sick baby. He had a ton of stomach issues. He was always vomiting. He must have been in immense pain. He would be up throughout the night, constantly crying. He was not a healthy baby whatsoever. And despite doctors repeatedly telling Sherry that she should not feed her baby cow's milk, she still did. And again, I'm just so baffled. Doctors are aware that she's feeding her baby cow's milk. Why is nothing being done about this? And Sherry and Mike, the parents, they would get so angry at Joshua for crying. Like, he has the audacity as a baby to cry. And this is when Mike, the dad, he was getting so angry at Joshua crying that Mike slapped Joshua across the face. He swore at him and threw this tiny baby down onto the couch. And Sherry just sat there and let this all carry out, didn't care one single bit. And I can guarantee you that Mike probably abused Joshua on multiple occasions. However, on this one time when Mike did this, thankfully there was another family member present who seemed like a decent human being because they reported this abuse straight away to the police. And Joshua was immediately taken out of his parents' custody and put up for adoption. So Joshua is now the second baby that has been taken off of Sherry. But do things stop there? No, because Sherry, she is now 22 years old. She falls pregnant again with Mike. They have another son who they call Michael Jr. And guess what? Pretty much the same thing happens. Michael Jr. was only a few months old when there was reports of child abuse. I'm not 100% sure of the kind of abuse, but I think we all know what Sherry and Mike are capable of. So then Michael Jr. was then taken out of their care. So this is now the third baby in a row to be taken off of Sherry. And you would think, surely, after 3 babies being taken off of Sherry straight away, you would think that the moment Sherry gets pregnant, you would think that authorities would be on her, and as soon as she gave birth, that baby would be taken off of her straight away because she has proven time and time again that she is unfit to raise children. But it doesn't, and the cycle just keeps going on and on. Because in early 1986, Sherry falls pregnant again. She now gives birth to her 4th child, which was actually a daughter. And this was Sherry's first daughter. Now, something that you need to know about Sherry is that she's obsessed with daughters, with girls, little girls. And I feel like it's because they kind of represent her, and she wants to continue on the work that her own dad started with her, which is just messed up, but it is very significant. And the little girl was named Maria, and Sherry's behavior towards Maria was completely different because Sherry doted on Maria. Maria was the light of her life. She cleaned up her trailer. It was actually nice and tidy and hygienic. She would dress Maria in clean clothes, in really nice outfits. She fed Maria properly, and she was also very, very protective over Maria. If anyone even went anywhere near Maria, Sherry would throw them a dirty look. Maria was also not allowed to be picked up by anyone else other than Sherry. And this could not be more different to how she was with her sons. Like, with her sons, she could not care less. But with Maria, it's almost like she cared too much in a creepy way, because there is a very disturbing reason why Sherry was so protective and obsessed with her daughter. Because in spring of 1987, a horrific discovery was made. Maria was approximately 1 year old at this point, and one evening Maria was rushed to the hospital by her grandmother, and it was discovered when Maria was at the hospital that little baby Maria was bleeding from her vagina, and it was discovered that Maria had been raped. But she hadn't just been raped once. No, she had been raped on multiple occasions. And who was behind all of this? Her own mother, Sherry. And that is the reason why Sherry was so protective over her daughter, because Sherry was sexually abusing her daughter, and she wanted to make sure that no one, no authority, nobody took her daughter away from her because she wanted to keep her for her sick and twisted fantasies. And I just cannot believe the monster that Sherry has turned into. Thankfully, Maria was removed from her care straight away. And apparently Sherry was distraught about this. And the only reason why she was distraught about this is because she could no longer sexually abuse her. So now this is the 4th baby in a row that has been abused in some kind of way by Sherry and been taken off of her. So now Sherry, she's now distraught that her baby girl has been taken off of her. So what does Sherry do? She tries to steal someone else's baby girl. And this is why I said earlier that this whole stealing baby thing will come back up. And who was this baby that she tried to steal? Well, this little baby that she tried to steal, her name was Vera Jo Regal, who is incredibly significant to today's case. So at this point, Vera was only 6 months old and she lived with her mother, a woman called Verna. And Verna was a neighbor of Sherry's. So that is how Sherry and Verna knew each other. And now that Sherry had had her own baby girl taken off of her, Sherry now started to turn up at Verna's home all of the time. So she could now spend time with the baby girl, Vera. So Sherry started to spend a lot of time with baby Vera. And it was so creepy because Sherry was almost acting like Vera was her own baby. Sherry would also babysit baby Vera, and I dread to think what Sherry was possibly doing to that baby when she was babysitting her. But it was just getting to a point where it was really creepy. Sherry was really trying to take over, and eventually Verna decided that this was enough. This had gone on for too long. Sherry was just really creepy. And she told Sherry that she was no longer allowed in the home and that she was not allowed to spend any more time with baby Vera. But it is just really creepy that Sherry was planning on stealing Vera. She wanted a baby girl for herself, and that is what she set out to do. But thankfully, Verna put a stop to it before she could. But remember Vera Jo Regal, because she will come back up in this case very sadly. So now that Sherry has been banned from seeing baby Vera, what does Sherry do? Well, I'm sure you can all guess by now what Sherry does, because Sherry became pregnant again. So Sherry is now pregnant for the 5th time, and this is another little baby girl that she gives birth to. She calls the girl Little Sherry, and unbelievably, Sherry is allowed to keep her new baby girl. And I'm like, what? This is the 5th child now, but Sherry has abused her previous 4 babies, and we're just allowing her to now keep a 5th. How does any of this make sense? And of course, because Sherry has given birth to a baby girl, she treats this new baby girl the same way she treated Maria. She became absolutely obsessed with little Sherry. She doted on her. However, the same thing happened again. We don't know the exact details, but what we do know is that little Sherry was taken out of Sherry's care when she was only 6 months old. And I think we all know what was going on. And I also want to point out, because it's very easy to forget, but Sherry is only 24 at this point. She is so young. She's already had 5 children, abused them all, had them all taken off of her, and it's just crazy. But anyway, at this point, 4 more years pass, and unbelievably, Sherry doesn't have any more children. In the 4-year period, there seems to have been quite a lot of change for Sherry. She got divorced from her husband Mike, who she got married to when she was 19. She then met another man called Kevin Lee Brooks. She got married to him. They moved into a house together, which would soon become the House of Horrors for this case. And not much is really known about Sherry over those 4 years. God knows what she was up to. And then after 4 years, when Sherry was 28, she fell pregnant. She gave birth to a little boy who she named Punky, and unlike her other sons, who she didn't really care that much about, Punky she became obsessed with. It was almost like Punky was like a baby girl to her. She doted on Punky, she bathed him, dressed him in clean clothes, you know, the basic things that parents do, but for Sherry, that's obsession. Punky would actually become the first child that would not be removed from Sherry's care, which is unbelievable, seeing as he's the 6th child. She should not have been allowed to keep him anyway, but it's just crazy. And then over the next few years, Sherry went on to give birth to 3 more children, all of which she kept. It's almost like Sherry, she hasn't changed or anything. She's still abusive. She's still neglective. I think she's just gotten better at covering her tracks, which is why the authorities are now not aware of how she's raising her children. But the other 3 children were Zachary, who was born in June of 1992. Zachary is very significant to today's case, so remember his name. And then the next was a boy named Garth, who was born in July of 1993. And then Sherry's 9th and final child, there are no more children after this, was a boy named Chuck, and he was born in 1997. So Sherry currently has 4 children that she is able to keep. So she's raising these 4 boys. But Sherry was not happy because ultimately Sherry wanted daughters, and she currently only had 4 sons. So Sherry was not happy about this. So she started to put some plans in motion on how she was going to change that. And let's just say she played the long game, because over the next 10 years, her 4 sons, they were obviously growing up, getting into their teenage years. And during this time, the Brooks family started to develop quite a reputation in the local community. They were basically the family that you avoided. They were trouble. Sherry got a reputation that she was a bully and a manipulator. She would terrorize her neighbors, causing all sorts of trouble.
We met Larry one time because he stopped out front of our house, and Samantha Swab was at our house, and she went outside and smacked Larry because they got into a fight because they owed money to her and stuff.
She also apparently became a drug dealer, which is how she was earning money. And she almost became the head of her own little crime family because she raised her 4 sons to commit crime and cause trouble on her behalf.
I raised my kids not to hit a girl, but if they're going to put their self in a man's place, then yeah, then do it.
She also went around telling everybody that her nickname was Sugar Babe, which, if you remember, is the creepy nickname that her dad gave her. And Sherry was becoming so manipulative that she's actually been compared to someone like Charles Manson, that she almost does have this cult-like following within her family, because what she said went. She ruled that family with an iron fist, and everyone was scared of her and everyone wanted to please her. So whatever she told you to do, you did it. And it's no surprise that she raised her 4 boys that she currently has living with her to be a nightmare for the neighborhood as well. Her eldest son, Punky, was incredibly violent. He would go around the neighborhood just beating people up for no reason, just to assert authority. He became known as the town bully. Punky also got into drug dealing along with his mom. He would also get involved with a lot of criminal activity, and he would go around telling everybody that he was a member of the Crips, which I'm pretty certain was not true. I think he was just using this as an intimidation tactic. Punky just wanted to scare people. He just wanted everyone to think that he was untouchable. And it turns out that Punky was the only person pretty much in the world that Sherry was scared of. Sherry almost respected Punky so much because of how scary he was. So I think that tells you a lot on who Punky was as a person. And the other 3 sons were not really that much better. They were just as violent. They were bullies, manipulative. They were also involved in criminal activity the older they got. And all in all, the family were just trouble. You didn't want to associate with them. You didn't want to be anywhere near them. And if you were near them, it wasn't good. So like I said a second ago, Sherry is not happy about the fact that she doesn't have a baby girl. So she's putting her plans into place, waiting it out. And now her boys are teenagers. So I think we know where this is going, because she started to think, okay, how am I going to get my hands on a little baby girl? And I told you stealing babies was going to be common throughout this case. So Sherry came up with the diabolical plan that she was going to get her 3 teenage sons to provide her with a baby girl themselves. At this point, her 3 eldest sons were teenagers aged between 13 and 16, and Sherry started to encourage all 3 of them to have unprotected sex. Sherry herself went out and found them all girlfriends because, you know, the girl had to be approved by Sherry, and normally the girl was pretty vulnerable and easily manipulated, so Sherry could have her way with her. Punky got himself a girlfriend who was a girl called Heather. Her 3rd eldest son got a girlfriend called Gina, and Sherry would encourage her 2 sons that had a girlfriend to bring them into her home, and she would encourage them to have unprotected sex. She was literally there outside of the room coaching the whole thing. And eventually Punky's girlfriend Heather, whose exact age is not clear at this point, she ended up falling pregnant. And Sherry was over the moon. She was like, oh my God, my plan is working. I'm going to have a little baby girl before you know it. But unfortunately for Sherry, Heather gave birth to a baby boy. And Sherry was furious with Heather about this, like Heather had any control over it. And Sherry resented Heather for having a baby boy. And if Sherry doesn't like you, your life is not easy. So Heather did not have it easy whatsoever. Not long after this, Sherry's 3rd oldest son, Garth, his girlfriend Gina felt pregnant, and Gina was pregnant with a little baby girl. And as soon as Sherry found out that Gina was pregnant with a girl, Sherry became obsessed with Gina. She would follow Gina everywhere, micromanage every single part of her life, stalk and harass her, because as far as Sherry was concerned, that little baby girl belonged to her, not Gina. But sadly, Gina miscarried. And Sherry did not take that news too well. She probably blamed Gina for that as well. And Sherry has now missed out again on an opportunity to have a baby girl for herself. So finally, we need to talk about Sherry's 2nd oldest son, Zachary. And like I said, Zachary is very significant to today's case. And the reason why Zachary was significant to today's case is that when Sherry went out to find Zachary a girlfriend, she found a girl by the name of Vera Jo Regal, who is the tragic victim of today's case. And we've already spoken about Vera. If you remember, cast your minds back to when Sherry tried to steal her neighbor's baby girl. Well, that baby girl that she tried to steal was Vera Jo Regal. But now Vera, she's obviously grown up. 15 years had passed, but now Vera was about to be sucked back in to Sherry's world. And I just think that that is so crazy that Sherry wanted to kidnap Vera when she was a baby. And all of those years later, Sherry has still found a way to destroy Vera's life. This case is messed up on so many levels. So we need to now talk about Vera. And over those 15 years, Vera had not had an easy life whatsoever. Because back when Vera was a very young child, not too long after Sherry had tried to steal her, it was discovered that Vera was born with various intellectual disabilities as well as ADHD. This meant that Vera had a significantly below average IQ. She struggled with pretty much everything in school: reading, writing, communication. It is said that her intellectual age is much lower than her actual age. When she was a teenager, her intellectual age was more similar to somebody that was 8 or 9 years old. But Vera thrived as best as she could in school. She had a ton of friends. She loved country music and jewelry. But then tragically, when Vera was only 11 years old, she suffered horrific and repeated sexual abuse by her own father. In the end, her father was arrested and sent to prison for 20 years. But obviously Vera still carried that trauma with her forever. And then eventually when Vera was 18 years old, she did graduate high school, even though she was still very far behind her peers. And it was very sadly not long after she graduated high school that Vera Jo Regal would be sucked into the twisted world of Sherry Brooks. Because it was just one random day when Vera was just out about in the neighborhood and she just so happened to bump into Sherry. Sherry was like, "Oh, hi Vera, do you remember me? I tried to steal you as a baby." Well, she didn't exactly say that, but To be honest, I wouldn't put it past her. Sherry is pretty obvious about what she does. And after Sherry and Vera had been talking, Sherry got the light bulb idea that she wanted Vera to be one of her son's girlfriends because Vera was the perfect victim. She was vulnerable, easy to manipulate. Sherry could control her very easily. And Sherry thought that the perfect boyfriend for Vera was her 13-year-old son, Zachary. Now, I probably need to remind you of Vera's age at this point because she's actually just turned 19 years old. And Sherry thought that this 19-year-old woman would be the perfect girlfriend for her 13-year-old son. Now, that is messed up on so many levels. No 19-year-old should be ever dating a 13-year-old. No, no, no. That is illegal. However, I just want to point out that there's no actual evidence that the relationship became sexual between Vera and Zachary when they are at these ages. In the beginning, Sherry just wanted Vera and Zachary to be friends and for it to blossom into a romantic relationship. She was conditioning Vera to be a future baby maker. And this is exactly what she did over the next few years. She slowly manipulated Vera into becoming a future baby maker, what she wanted. She started inviting Vera over to the home more and more to spend time with Zachary. And it is incredibly creepy to think about a 19-year-old woman coming over to a home to hang out with a 13-year-old child. But I do just want to stress in this case, it's not that black and white because Vera, her mental age is closer to an 8, 9, possibly 10-year-old at this point, even though she's 19 years old. So yes, it's hella wrong, but it's definitely a bit of a grey area. And ultimately, it's Sherry that is the one that is orchestrating all of this. Vera has no idea that what she is doing is extremely inappropriate. She is being completely conditioned and brainwashed by Sherry. And it didn't take Sherry long to realise just how vulnerable Vera was. So Sherry started manipulating Vera into doing pretty much everything for her. Sherry starts instructing Vera to do all of the chores around the house because Sherry was a wheelchair user and she couldn't do chores herself. And Vera was happy to oblige and do all the chores for her. Sherry also asked Vera to start rubbing her feet daily, which I'm just like, ugh, no, ugh. Vera also had to carry out some of Sherry's dirty work, which included criminal activity, probably something like drug dealing or whatever. And then eventually Sherry realised that Vera received social security checks because of her disabilities. So this is when Sherry convinced Vera to hand over all of the checks to her. So Sherry got the money. And once again, Vera happily agreed to do all of this because she couldn't see that she was being manipulated and used. Vera probably saw Sherry as a motherly figure, as this person that's probably took her in, that's being kind to her. Vera has had to face a lot of adversity in her life, and she probably sees Sherry as almost like a hero savior. So things go on like this for a few more years because, like I said, Sherry plays the long game when it comes to Vera. So Sherry is manipulating and abusing and brainwashing Vera over years. This is not something that happens overnight, so you need to bear that in mind, that slowly over time, Vera is just being broken down more and more. To make things even worse, Vera's parents move away. They move to a different town, so Vera is now completely on her own. She has no one to look out for her apart from Sherry. So of course, Sherry sees this as an invitation to make Vera move in with her. So now Vera is completely isolated, and the only thing that she now knows is Sherry and the Brooks family, and none of them are good. So at this point, Zachary had turned 16, and Sherry was like, right, now is the time to get Vera and Zachary to start having unprotected sex because she wants a baby girl. So she would send her 16-year-old son Zachary into a room with 22-year-old Vera, and Sherry would be stood on the other side of the door, literally coaching her son and Vera into having sex. Zachary, I also want to point out, he also has development issues and a personality disorder. So he is also very very easily manipulated by his mom. And Sherry soon gets what she wants because Vera falls pregnant. And as soon as Vera is pregnant, Sherry becomes obsessed with her in the hopes that Vera is pregnant with a baby girl. And guess what? Sherry got her wish. Vera was pregnant with a girl. So now Sherry becomes obsessed with Vera, doting on her, controlling her, following her, harassing her every minute of every day because Sherry sees that baby as hers. Sherry attended every single doctor's appointment. Sherry was always the one asking questions. Vera was not really allowed to talk. Sherry was the one that picked out all of the baby clothes and the baby furniture and everything. Sherry even took it upon herself to choose the baby's name. Yeah, Vera was not allowed to choose her own baby's name. That was Sherry's job. And the name that Sherry came up with to call this baby girl is sick, it is twisted, it is disgusting. So Sherry decides that she wants to call this baby girl Willine. And this is no offense to the name Willine or anything like that, but there is a meaning behind this name for Sherry, because the way Sherry came up with the name Willine for the baby girl was that it was a combination of Vera's biological father's name, whose name was Willard, and then Dean, which was the surname of Sherry's biological dad. And the reason why the whole Willine, it's just so sick and twisted, is because Sherry wanted to name this baby girl after two fathers that had sexually abused their daughters. Yeah, let that sink in. Vera's own biological father sexually abused her. Sherry's biological father sexually abused her. So Sherry wants to name this new baby girl a combination of the two names of the two monsters of their lives. How sick and twisted is that? So now, every time Vera would hold her baby, Willine, she would be reminded of the sexual predator that was her father. But that's not the only thing, because Sherry decided that she wanted full custody of Willine. She told Zach that he must sign over his rights as a parent to Sherry. And of course, Zachary does everything for his mom, so he immediately signed over custody. And she didn't even bother to ask Vera to sign over custody because Sherry now believed that that was all it took. Now, of course, Sherry never put any of this into place legally because obviously there's a lot more hoops that you need to jump through for that. But it didn't matter to Sherry. In Sherry's mind, she had sole custody of Willine, and that was good enough. So now we get to late October. Vera is currently about 7.5 months pregnant at this point. And now Sherry comes up with an absolutely horrific plan because Sherry's birthday is November 3rd. And Sherry wants the baby to be born on her birthday. However, there is one problem to that, and that is the baby is not due for another 6 weeks. And we are currently at the end of October. The 3rd of November is literally only a few days away. But did this deter Sherry? No, because Sherry thinks that she can play God. And she wanted to induce Vera. She wanted her to go into labour early. And how was she going to make this happen? And that was castor oil. So this is a little bit of an old wives' tale. And that is, if you take castor oil, it can induce labour. I don't know how true that is. I am not a medical professional. Do not listen to anything I am saying right now. But apparently you only need like a couple of spoonfuls of castor oil and it can induce labor. And there are obviously risks to this. It can cause a whole host of nasty side effects. And it's not even conclusive that it works or not. Like, it's just like an old wives' tale. However, Sherry doesn't care about this. She just thought, oh, there's this old wives' tale, castor oil. Yeah, I'm going to get Vera to consume some castor oil. She didn't care about the risks. She just wanted that baby out on November 3rd. So instead of giving Vera a few spoonfuls, which is what the old wives' tale suggests, she forced Vera to drink 3 whole bottles. And castor oil is basically a laxative. So 3 whole bottles of a laxative, it would have caused severe stomach cramping, pain, all kinds of intestinal issues, possibly bleeding, and a whole host of other side effects. Drinking this amount is so dangerous, let alone the fact that Vera is pregnant. But unbelievably, it worked. And Vera went into labour. She went into labour 6 weeks early just because Sherry wanted her to give birth on her birthday. However, things didn't turn out quite the way Sherry wanted because the baby was actually born on November 4th, not the 3rd. But the baby Willine, was born 6 weeks early. She was extremely underweight. She had problems breathing and she had to spend the next few weeks in the INCU unit on critical support, all because Sherry just wanted the baby born on her birthday. It's utter madness. I just don't get it. Sherry has been obsessed with having a baby girl for so many years. Why would she do something so reckless to jeopardize the life of the baby girl that she apparently wants so badly? But thankfully, Willine did pull through, no thanks to Sherry, and she was taken home by Vera, and Vera obviously fell in love with her little baby girl straight away. Little baby Willine was Vera's pride and joy. She was a proud new mom, but of course there was one big problem. And that was Sherry, because Sherry saw baby Willine as hers, not Vera's. So whenever Vera was just being a mom to her new baby, Sherry would come barging into the room and say, "Give Willine to me, I'm the only one that can look after her." And Sherry would literally snatch the baby out of Vera's arms and push Vera out of the way. And where is Zachary in all of this? Because I haven't really mentioned him, because obviously he's the dad. Well, he didn't really care about the baby. He was just there to please his mom, and his mom wanted Willine, so Zachary wanted his mom to have Willine as well. And things went on like this for the next few months. Vera really did try to raise her baby, but as the months rolled by, Sherry was becoming more dominant and more possessive. And because Vera still tried to be a mom to Willine, this really annoyed Sherry. So Sherry soon realized that she needed to get Vera out of the picture. Sherry was like, how dare she? How dare she touch my Willine? So this is when Sherry started her campaign of abuse towards Vera to try and drive her away. And this is now where things in this case start to get really, really hard to listen to, because sadly from this point going forward, Vera would be beaten by somebody in the Brooks family pretty much every single day. But was it Sherry herself carrying out this physical abuse? No, Sherry never lifted a finger herself. She dictated others to abuse Vera. And most of the time it was her son Zachary, who was supposed to be Vera's boyfriend, the father of her child. Zachary would beat Vera black and blue. During this time as well, Zachary actually did break up with Vera. He didn't want to be her boyfriend anymore. And Sherry found this hilarious because Vera was heartbroken. Any pain that Sherry could cause Vera, she thrived on it. And then what did Sherry do? She wanted to cut Vera off from the world. I mean, at this point anyway, Vera is already pretty isolated, but Vera would still talk on the phone to her mom and her sister. But now Sherry put a stop to that. Sherry also manipulated Vera into thinking that her own mom didn't like her. And you have to remember that Vera is incredibly vulnerable, so she believed everything that Sherry said. So Vera felt like she had no one but Sherry. And then on top of this, Sherry also banned Vera from ever leaving the house without her permission. Vera was forced to remain locked inside, and she was only allowed to speak when spoken to. So she was now essentially held prisoner in the Brooks household. And not only that, she was also no longer able to spend any time with her own baby. And you might be wondering, so why the hell is Sherry even keeping Vera around? Like, why hasn't she just kicked her out of the house? Well, that is because Sherry was still receiving Vera's benefits. She was still getting money because of Vera's disabilities. So that is the only reason why Vera is still in the house. And of course, Vera didn't argue back to any of this. She didn't have the mental capacity to even stand up for herself to argue back. And because Vera had been so brainwashed, Vera did truly believe that what was happening to her was normal and deserved. It's just absolutely heartbreaking to think about how vulnerable Vera is and how she is being taken advantage of. But things are about to get so much worse for Vera. And it all started when an incident occurred with Sherry's oldest son in the house, Punky. And Punky is the son that Sherry absolutely adored. He was her pride and joy.
I mean, you talk about Punky, it was like, wow, Punky, you know, all the girls went wild for Punky.
And this all started on the 4th of July 2010. Punky was out for a walk with his girlfriend Heather when a freak accident occurred because Punky was just walking on the sidewalk with his girlfriend and he ended up being struck by a car and he lost his life. And as far as we're aware, it was a complete accident and it really did happen that quickly, and Sherry was absolutely devastated. Now, at the time, Punky was actually on his way to buy some heroin, so there are some people that have speculated that maybe it wasn't a freak accident and maybe it was a drug deal gone wrong. But the official report marked his death as an accident. However, Sherry did not buy into that. Sherry wanted someone to blame. And who did she blame? Well, she blamed the only person that was with Punky at the time, which was his girlfriend, Heather. She blamed Heather for killing Punky on purpose. Now, there is zero evidence to suggest this. There is more evidence to suggest drug deal gone wrong than the girlfriend did it. But Sherry doesn't care about reality or facts. She just wants to take her anger out on somebody, and that somebody in this instance was Heather. And because of this, Sherry arranged for some of her family members to beat Heather up, which included curb stomping her. And if you don't know what curb stomping is, it freaks me out. Curb stomping involves somebody essentially biting a curb, like placing their teeth around a curb, and then another person stomping on the back of their neck and breaking things. It just freaks me out. Like, why would anyone want to do that? And this happened to Heather based on no evidence, but Sherry just blaming her for Punky's death. But after Heather received this beating, Sherry seemed to forgive her and move on. So then it was Punky's funeral, and his ashes were set up in the living room next to a shrine that Sherry had set up for Punky. So there was a huge shrine in the living room dedicated to Punky. And on this shrine, Sherry had placed a Kit Kat chocolate bar next to the shrine because this was Punky's favorite chocolate bar. And this is very significant, so remember this Kit Kat bar. So after Punky's death, things for Vera only got worse because Sherry, she was always angry and she was always looking to take her anger out on someone. And since the death of her oldest son, she was even more angry, and she has forgiven Heather. But now she wants to just carry on taking out all of her anger out on Vera. And because she is more angry because of Punky's death, the abuse only got worse. Because the next form of punishment that Sherry inflicted on Vera was food restriction. Sherry didn't allow Vera to eat, pretty much full stop. Vera was only allowed to eat when Sherry said she was allowed to eat. And when she was allowed to eat, she had to eat on the floor like an animal, whilst the rest of the family sat around a table. She was also only fed leftovers and moldy food. Vera also was kept in disgusting conditions. She was locked and isolated in a room that had a broken window. So as you can imagine, it was freezing in this room. This room was also incredibly moldy and dirty. The bathtub that Vera was allowed to use was covered in black mold. But to be fair, I think the whole family used that moldy bathtub. And I'm just like, why is no one cleaning here? Like, why would anyone, like Sherry, why would Sherry want to get into a moldy bathtub? The mattress that Vera was forced to sleep on as well was basically rotting away. It was covered in urine and feces. There were cockroaches all over her bedroom. She was living in conditions that nobody, no human or no animal should be living in. Speaking of animals, this is when Sherry decided to bring a pig into the house. Yeah, I bet you didn't expect that. A whole pig. A pig. And I know people have pigs as pets. I'm not saying that you can't have a pig for a pet, but Sherry, she brought in a pig and she didn't bring it in for a pet. And this pig was kept in Vera's room. And I think it was a symbol of how they saw Vera. The pig was kept in the closet in Vera's room, and the pig was never allowed out. So the pig would urinate and defecate everywhere in the closet. Sherry would also let the pig out in Vera's room, and then the pig would urinate and defecate on Vera's mattress and just all over the room. And obviously no one is cleaning here. And Vera can't even clean if she wanted to either, because she's locked in this room. It was literally a pigsty. Literally. And on top of this, just as another form of cruel punishment, Sherry would sometimes force Vera to sleep in the closet with the pig. The closet that is full of urine and feces with a pig. And of course, the beatings, the daily beatings, are still happening. Sherry would now get someone to beat Vera if Vera went anywhere near her own baby Willine. Can you imagine how traumatizing that would be for Vera as a mom? Sherry would carry around a big stick, and if Vera got anywhere near baby Willine, Sherry would take out this stick and viciously beat Vera herself. Vera would curl up into a ball and just repeatedly say, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry." And Sherry would just say, "Don't touch my baby." Vera would just be crying. She would be there in a ball, just so defenseless, so vulnerable. And Vera never said a word back. She never argued back. She never tried to defend herself. She always just took the punishment. On top of all of this, Sherry would also make up lies about Vera, that Vera was disgracing the Brooks family name. And because they're so proud to be a part of the Brooks family, and because they're basically a cult, this was motivation for the other family members, including the three sons, so Zachary, Garth, and Chuck, to also beat up Vera more viciously because she is a disgrace to the Brooks family name. And Vera just felt completely trapped. Even though Vera at this moment, she is 24 years old, you have to remember that her mental capacity is somewhere between an 8 and a 10-year-old. On top of that, she's also completely brainwashed into thinking that what is happening to her is normal and deserved. And I have no idea where Vera's family are at this moment. I know that her parents moved to a different town, but still, where are they? Why is no one asking about Vera? You would think that at least one of them would question why all of a sudden Vera no longer has contact with them, but they didn't. And as for the authorities, it is their job, obviously, to be aware of situations like this and help people like Vera. And when it comes to the Brooks family, the authorities here have failed multiple times. Because how many babies before Vera have they failed? Because the thing that is so infuriating about this case is that authorities knew what was going on. CPS did come out to perform welfare checks on Willine, and they could see the state of the house that both Vera and Willine were living in. These conditions alone should warrant a baby being taken out of that situation. There is urine, feces all over the floor, black mold everywhere, dirt everywhere. It is so unhygienic. Not a situation, an environment that a baby should be living in. But on top of that, when CPS came out, they saw the conditions that Vera was in. They could see bruises all over her face, all over her body. She was wounded constantly. You could also see it in her demeanor that she was being abused. And obviously CPS, they did ask Vera, "Are you okay? What is going on?" But Vera, because of how vulnerable she is and how brainwashed she is, Vera would just say, "Oh no, I'm fine. I just got into a little accident." And they would say, "Do you like living here with Sherry?" And Vera would respond, "Yes." But it's like, surely CPS, they should be trained to see through things like this. But they just took on the attitude of, well, Vera's an adult, so she can make decisions for herself. But what about Willine? She is a baby. She can't make decisions for herself. So why the hell has Willine been left in that house? Police also ended up visiting the house anywhere between 10 and 20 times. An exact number is not known, but police visited that house so many times due to other criminal activity that the Brooks family were involved in. And every single time, police officers saw Vera, saw the state that she was in, and they also did nothing. And because of all of the failings from authorities, this would now now lead to tragedy. Because in the beginning of 2011, this is now just weeks from the tragic events of today's case. This is when a very fateful incident would occur. Because at this point, Vera was in a terrible state. Willine was currently 15 months old, and Vera had been putting up with regular beatings, abuse, and neglect for over a year now. And as you can imagine, that had taken a toll on Vera, especially now that her food is also being restricted. She was starving, she had lost so much weight, and in this moment, Vera had not had any food for 3 days. So one day Vera was in the house on her own, and she was in the living room with Punky's shrine. Now, if you remember, a part of Punky's shrine, there is a Kit Kat chocolate bar. Now Vera, she was so hungry. She saw that Kit Kat bar and she ate it. Now Vera ate the chocolate bar because she thought that she was in the house on her own. And she ate the chocolate bar because, one, she was so hungry, but two, because of her mental capacity, she didn't quite realize what she was doing. But there was a huge problem. She was not in the house on her own, because Vera was caught by one of Sherry's minions, who was Gina, who was Garth's girlfriend. And Gina had been trying to get back into the good books of Sherry since she had a miscarriage, which is just so crazy when I say those words, that she's trying to make up to a psychopath because she's had a miscarriage. But Gina straight away ran to Sherry, thinking that this was going to get her back in her good books. And as you can imagine, Sherry went absolutely crazy. Things only got worse from this moment on, because Sherry saw this as Vera attacking Punky. So Sherry instructed her two sons, Zachary and Garth, to beat the life out of Vera. Vera was left with 2 black eyes, a broken nose, and cuts and wounds all over her body. But was that her only punishment? No. Sherry had something absolutely horrific planned for Vera. But again, Sherry is very patient. So before we get to Sherry's plans, we now need to introduce 2 more monsters in this case. And they play a huge role in what ends up happening to Vera Jo Regal. Because at this point, I should probably point out that there are so many people living in this house. And it's not the biggest house in the world. I truly don't know how they all fit in there. So we've obviously got Sherry. We've also got her husband, Kevin, who we've barely even mentioned, but he is there as well. And the fact that I've barely mentioned him is because we don't really know anything about him. He seems to just have melted into the background. As far as we're aware, he didn't participate himself in abuse, but he just stood by and watched it. Then we've obviously got Vera and baby Willine living in the house. Then we've got 3 of Sherry's sons living in the house. We have Zachary, Garth, and Chucky. And then we've also got Garth's girlfriend, Gina, living in the house. On top of this, 2 of Sherry's older sons from earlier on in this case, the ones that were taken away from her, 2 of them have now grown up into adults. They have since moved back in with Sherry. So the first of those sons is Scotty, who is Sherry's oldest son, the one that she had with her first cousin. You've also got to remember as well, Scotty was taken away from Sherry because Sherry was sexually abusing him as a baby, and now he's moved back in with her. And then her third eldest son, Mike Jr., has also moved back into the house, and he was also removed from Sherry because of unknown reasons. But I think we can all guess why. And then his girlfriend, Shannon, also spends a lot of time at the house. So there is a lot of people coming and going in this house. And now we need to introduce 2 more people. And they are critical to the rest of the events of today's case. And they are Danny Bixler and Nicole Peters. Danny Bixler, he was 21 years old, and he was an extended family member of the Brooks family. It turns out he is the son of the cousin that Sherry was in a relationship with. You know, the kissing cousins, the one that is Scotty's dad.
They call us the kissing cousins.
So Danny and Scotty are technically half brothers. It's very, very confusing. So Danny is kind of family in a weird way. It's all very incestuous and messed up. And then Nicole Peters, she was 17 years old, and she is Danny's girlfriend. And Danny and Nicole met for the first time when they were both in juvie. You know how all good love stories start. However, they were forced apart because Danny was sent to prison for 18 months. However, in the beginning of 2011, they were finally reunited, and Nicole became obsessed with Danny. She would follow him around like a little lost puppy. She would do anything for him. However, after only 1 week of being released from prison, Danny got into a fight which breached his probation, so an arrest warrant was put out for him. So Danny and Nicole, they went on the run, and Danny fled to his Aunt Sherry's house. So Danny and Nicole now move in to the Brooks household, and from the moment they move in, things move very, very quickly. Because do you remember that Punky, he claimed that he was in the Crips? Well, Danny also claimed the same thing, which apparently because Danny and Punky, they were both in the Crips, they were very close and they were very bonded. And Sherry knew this, and obviously Punky has died. So Sherry started filling Danny's head that Vera was the one responsible for Punky's death, which is obviously not true. Sherry, not too long ago, was blaming Heather for Punky's death, but now she wants to blame Vera because she knows Danny will want revenge for Punky's death. Sherry starts saying that it was Vera on the walk with Punky, and she pushed Punky in front of a car, and that is how Punky died. And when Danny heard this, he was furious. He needed to take revenge for his fellow gang member, for Punky. And this is exactly what Sherry wanted. So now Danny and Nicole would join in on beating Vera up. But Danny was a lot more violent. He used weapons. He found a padlock lying on the side, and he attached the metal padlock to the end of a belt. And he started whipping Vera with this belt, with the padlock on the end, over and over again. And he was whipping her over her head, and Vera's face was pouring with blood. She must have been in agony. And Sherry was there watching the whole thing. She was egging Danny on the whole time. And Nicole was there, the 17-year-old girlfriend of Danny. She was there the whole time as well. And you would think that possibly she would be horrified because she's not being exposed to the Brooks family. Like, she hasn't been exposed to any of this. You would think that maybe she would be shocked, horrified, wanting to run for the hills. But no, Nicole was turned on. And I mean sexually. She was turned on. Nicole is sick and twisted, just as sick and twisted as the rest of them. And she got a sexual satisfaction from watching Danny beat up Vera. So when Nicole was watching this whole thing happen, after Danny had finished, Danny and Nicole went into another room to have sex because Nicole was so turned on. I'm speechless. What the actual hell? And because Nicole was getting such a sexual satisfaction, the abuse got worse. Because every single time Danny would beat up Vera, Danny and Nicole would run off and have sex somewhere. And Sherry was probably egging them on to have sex as well, because she was probably hoping that another baby girl would pop out. So Danny would beat up Vera with the metal padlock on the belt. He would also use wooden items as well. He would beat her black and blue. She would be covered in bruises, cuts. She would be bleeding. Nicole actually started to join in herself, and she got a thrill from that as well. Nicole punched Vera so hard and so many times in the face, nearly every single bone in Vera's face was broken. And then on top of all of this, Nicole started accusing Vera of wanting Danny in a romantic way, which was not true whatsoever. This was just another part of Nicole's sick and twisted fetishes, because she wanted Danny to beat up Vera in her honor. So Danny would. And then Danny and Nicole would run off and have sex somewhere. It even got to a point where Danny would strip Vera down to her underwear to beat her up, because that turned on Nicole even more. And that was the cycle. Every single day, sometimes multiple times a day, Danny and Nicole would beat up Vera, then they'd go have sex, then they would do it again. And it was just this cycle, this sick and twisted cycle. And Sherry was loving life. Vera was a shell of herself. She could barely even move from the floor because of the injuries that she had. She was in a constant state of fear. Other members of the Brooks family have even said that she could no longer be considered human at this point. And I'm just like, well, if you think that, why aren't you doing something? But Sherry still wanted more. She was no longer satisfied with just Danny and Nicole now beating Vera every single day. She wanted to take it further. Sherry now started telling more family members that Vera was responsible for Punky's death. Even though the other family members that she was telling, so her other 3 sons, so Chucky, Garth, and Zachary, who is the father of Willine, they all knew that Vera had nothing to do with Punky's death. But because Sherry said that Vera was responsible, They believed her. And they were just using this as an excuse. They really are. No one actually believes that Vera is responsible for Punky's death. They're all just using that as an excuse to make themselves feel better and to make themselves feel more justified in their beatings. Because now a whole host of people start punishing Vera for something that she hasn't even done. And I need to warn you again. From now on, things get even harder to listen to. Sherry was now ordering Vera to strip naked. And then she ordered her 3 sons, Zachary, Garth, Chuck, and then also Danny and Nicole to beat Vera up at the same time. And Sherry would invite other family members over and they would all just sit and watch like it was a sport. And the beatings of Vera would last up to 45 minutes of constantly being beaten on. But then things went further because Danny, during one of these beatings, decided to pull out a knife and he stabbed Vera. And this was the first time that Vera had been stabbed. Things are now definitely escalating and Sherry found this hilarious. She was laughing the whole time, and to make things even more twisted, Sherry actually went over to Vera and went to her stab wound in her leg, and Sherry pushed her finger into the stab wound. And it has been said by other members of the family that were there that Sherry pushed her finger in up to her knuckle. I can't even imagine how painful that would have been for Vera. But things just keep on escalating. Sherry now instructs her 14-year-old boy, Chucky, to go outside to retrieve dog poop. And then once he was back inside, the group gathered around and collectively just watched as they forced Vera to eat this dog poop. Vera, she ate the dog poop, but then she actually vomited it all back up. But then Sherry made Vera eat that as well. But the treatment gets worse. It gets more degrading. Nicole took a plunger and handed it to Danny, and Danny sodomized Vera. And it still gets even worse. It still gets more degrading. Nicole picks up a toothbrush and Nicole sexually assaults Vera with this toothbrush. And at the time, Vera was on her period. And when Nicole removed the toothbrush, it was covered in blood. And then Nicole made Vera brush her teeth with the same toothbrush. They are doing everything in their power to humiliate and degrade Vera. It is very clear that they no longer see Vera as a human. And very sadly, we now get to the point in the case where this abuse, everything would now end in tragedy. And this all started in March of 2011. Sherry began to talk constantly about the fact that she wanted Vera murdered. Sherry was making her intentions very clear. And Sherry also had a plan on how she was going to get away with murder. Sherry truly did think that she was a mastermind. And if I'm going to be completely honest, I can understand why she thinks that. Because so far, she's gotten away with everything. I mean, yes, she's had multiple babies taken off of her, but when you actually think about it, when it comes to the law, she hasn't faced any repercussions. So I understand why Sherry truly does think that she's invincible. And unfortunately, that will continue. But I am jumping ahead of myself there. So how did Sherry plan on getting away with murdering Vera? Well, it was all related to Vera being involved in a train accident, which I know sounds very bizarre. And you're probably thinking, a train accident? Like, how is she going to do that? Well, it turns out, just a couple of years prior to this, one of Sherry's nephews, who was 16 years old, he was a boy named Travis. He was out and about playing near train tracks. He accidentally fell over, a train approached and hit him and beheaded him in the process, which is definitely a freak accident. What the hell? And it truly was an accident, and when it was investigated, it was recorded as an accident. So Sherry got inspiration from this freak accident, and she wanted to make it look like Vera had had a similar accident, just accidentally got hit by a train. So this is when Sherry told the group that they would, quote, cut her up first just to make sure that she's dead. And then after they were sure that Vera was dead, they would place Vera on the train tracks where she would, quote, get turned into hamburger meat. And the fact that Vera would get turned into, quote, hamburger meat would mean that all evidence would be destroyed with her. However, in typical Sherry fashion, she did not want to carry out this murder herself. No, she never lifted a finger. She wanted someone else to do her dirty work. And Zachary, the ex-boyfriend of Vera, the father of Willine, volunteered. But Sherry didn't want Zachary to commit the murder. Sherry didn't want any of her sons to commit the murder. No one that she actually cared about. So who did Sherry ask instead to carry out the murder? Well, she asked Danny and Nicole. Sherry started to manipulate both of them, saying that Vera needed to pay for what she had done to Punky. And it didn't take much convincing because Danny and Nicole, they agreed to participate. And on the 26th of March 2011, this is when the terrible events of today's case take place. And this next bit is kind of confusing. I've tried to make it as simple as possible, but it's definitely very confusing because we're just going on Sherry's word here and she talks a load of nonsense. So the day started and a can of pepper spray got thrown into the house and fumes went everywhere. And Shannon, who was the girlfriend of Mike, she was claiming to be pregnant at the time. And she became furious, saying that the pepper spray was going to harm her baby, blah, blah, blah. Shannon went to the ER, she came home and she was perfectly fine. However, Shannon wanted to blame somebody for the whole incident, for the pepper spray, for everything. And who did she blame? She blamed Vera. Because Vera got blamed for everything. Anything that ever went wrong in that household, Vera was the one to blame. So the whole family got so riled up, they were verbally attacking Vera, physically attacking her, all blaming her for this pepper spray incident. And I'm just like, what is going through their brains? Where the hell is Vera going to get pepper spray from? And this is when Sherry recommended that Danny and Nicole go for a walk with Vera. And Vera was terrified. I think she possibly has clocked on to what that walk meant. And Vera started begging anyone to go with her. She begged Shannon, who refused. She begged Scotty, who is Sherry's oldest son, and apparently he is the most reasonable out of the Brooks family, but he also refused. And in the end, by 9 p.m, Vera was forced to leave that house with Danny and Nicole. And Vera was kicking and screaming. She really didn't want to go, but Danny threatened to crack her head open on the porch if she didn't do what she was told. So Vera left the house and Sherry was just stood there with the biggest smirk on her face. And this is when Sherry said to Vera, "Good night." And Vera apparently turned around and said, "Good night, sugar babe."
She said, "Good night, sugar babe," and I said, "Good night."
And these chilling last 3 words from Vera are actually the name of the documentary on this case, Good Night, Sugar Babe. Because after this, Danny and Nicole led Vera down to the train tracks. And once they were in a secluded area, this is when Nicole pulled out a knife and started to stab Vera. But at first, the knife was so blunt that Nicole couldn't even pierce Vera's clothes. So she forced Vera to strip naked, and then Nicole again just started to stab Vera, and she left her with 15 separate stab wounds. And Vera was screaming. She was so frightened, she would have been in pain, but because the knife was so blunt, the stab wounds were very shallow, so Vera was still able to fight her off a little bit. However, this is when Danny joined in, and he stabbed Vera 6 times, inflicting very deep wounds. He stabbed her in the legs, meaning that Vera could no longer stand up. And in one last sadistic act, this is when Danny grabbed Vera from behind, held the knife to her neck, and slit her throat from ear to ear. And then Danny laid Vera's body out across the train tracks so that her head would be hit directly by a train, just as Sherry had instructed, so all of the evidence would be destroyed. And then Danny and Nicole fled the scene. However, at this point, incredibly, Vera was still alive. I mean, she was barely clinging to life, but she was still alive. And in one final act, Vera pulled her head off of the train tracks and tucked her legs in. Vera was lying there naked in the fetal position, and she was now lying between the 2 train tracks rather than having her head on one of them. But tragically, due to her injuries, it was in this position that Vera Jo Regal lost her life. And it just breaks my heart that Vera was just lying there, just in so much pain. And in her final moments, she was lying in a strange place. She was naked and she was probably thinking about her daughter, the daughter that she was leaving with a monster. The murder of Vera Jo Regal is just completely senseless and unnecessary and just so cruel. And it was shortly after Vera died that a train did come. But because of the position that Vera was lying in, because she was between the two train tracks, the train actually went over her. It missed her body by 6 inches. And this means that Vera's final act of moving herself into that position would mean that all evidence would be left behind. And this would be crucial in identifying her killers. The train driver did see Vera's body, and as soon as they saw Vera's body, they slammed the brakes on and the police were called. And the police started an investigation straight away, and one of the officers recognized Vera straight away, recognized that she lived in the Brooks household, which really infuriates me, because it's like, how the hell does a police officer recognize Vera? Oh, is it because you were one of the police officers that went over there and did absolutely nothing? But anyway, police officers went over to the household. They informed Sherry that Vera had died. And Sherry, she tried to put on the waterworks. She tried to act like she was devastated.
Shannon told me that they took Vera up to the tracks and that they degutted her like a fish and that they left her up there to die. And Shannon said, don't worry about it because she deserved it.
Sherry started to make up all sorts of lies about Vera, that Vera had gone off with her boyfriend, who was this strange man, and it was probably her boyfriend that was responsible. And this is obviously all a lie because Vera doesn't have a boyfriend. However, thankfully, the investigation wouldn't take too long to actually figure out what happened, because Danny, after he had murdered Vera, he got incredibly drunk. He was really messed up by what he has done. Nicole, on the other hand, she didn't care. She is cold and calculated, and she has no soul. But Danny, even though it doesn't excuse him, he was really affected by what happened, got really drunk. He went to his sister's house and he confessed the whole thing to his sister. So then his sister called the police, and Danny and Nicole were immediately arrested for the murder. And Danny, in his interview, he confessed pretty much straight away to what he has done. He told them everything about his involvement, and he also told them about Nicole's involvement. And what Danny told the police was enough, because Nicole, she tried to plead her innocence. She was not taking responsibility whatsoever, but it didn't matter. The police now charge both Danny and Nicole with murder. So Danny and Nicole, they are currently in custody for their involvement with the murder. But what about everybody else? Because yes, it was Danny and Nicole that took Vera's life, but there was a lot of other family members that were involved in the planning, and it was Sherry's idea. She was the mastermind behind the whole thing. She basically carried out the murder herself. Well, Sherry, as well as her sons Chucky, Zachary, and Mike, as well as Mike's girlfriend Shannon, they were all charged with obstruction of justice because they all lied to the police, saying that Vera had this mysterious boyfriend that must have done this. But apart from that, they didn't get charged with anything else. No one got charged with abuse for the beatings that Vera went through. Every single person in that household participated in some kind of way to abusing Vera, but no one got charged. And then when it comes to Sherry, who is the head of this family, this cult-like family, she was the mastermind behind all of the abuse. She was orchestrating the whole thing, and she was the one that planned the murder. She was charged with absolutely nothing apart from obstruction. And I cannot even tell you how angry that makes me, and it blows my mind. She basically got away scot-free. How was she not even charged with conspiracy to murder? Like an accessory of some sort? Like how? This is one of the biggest miscarriages of justice I think I've ever seen. Because yes, Danny and Nicole, they deserve to be in prison, 100%. But if there is one person that deserves to be in prison more, that is Sherry. And if you want to get even angrier, you should go and watch the documentary Goodnight Sugar Babe, because Sherry is on that documentary herself. And there is a load of other family members from the Brooks family on that documentary, and they all sit around and talk about the murder and how Sherry and everyone got away with it. They're literally there on camera talking about it. And unbelievably, there is one clip in the documentary where Sherry is talking about this case, and one of her sons has to physically place their hand over Sherry's mouth because she is about to say something incriminating.
Is there any big points you plan to come across to them?
I will make sure that they know that Desta Bixler,
It is ridiculous. It is so obvious that they're all involved and Sherry is the mastermind, but she didn't get charged with anything. So eventually Danny and Nicole, they go to trial. Nicole is still pleading her innocence. However, it didn't matter in the end. They were both found guilty of murder. Danny was sentenced to 40 years to life in prison. And Nicole, given the fact that she was only 17 when the murder happened, which is just crazy when you realize how young Nicole was when she committed murder, she was given a shorter sentence of 23 years. And Nicole will be out of prison when she's 40, which is still so young, and it's just so crazy. And there is footage of Nicole more recently, and you can still see that she has no remorse. You can still see that she's so cold and just has no soul. And for everyone else in the case that was charged with obstruction, they received anywhere between 1 and 2 years in prison. And then when it came to Sherry and her trial for obstruction, well, for some reason her trial was dragged out a little bit, and it took 4 years for Sherry to go to trial. So her trial took place in 2015. And Sherry was facing obstruction charges as well as drug trafficking whilst on probation. And those were her only charges. Nothing about physical assault, conspiracy to murder, holding someone captive, trying to steal a baby, fraud as well, because you got to remember she was stealing those security checks. And there's probably a whole host of other things that she could have been charged with. But no, she was only charged with obstruction and drug trafficking. And for these two charges, Sherry faced 40 months in prison. Yeah, 40 months. It should be 40 years. For everything that she has done to Vera, she only spent 40 months in prison. And in the years that have followed since the murder of Vera Jo Regal, a lot of members of the Brooks family have been in and out of prison for various different things. Zachary especially has faced multiple charges to do with assault and violence. He definitely seems to be very, very violent. And in 2019, when Sherry was finally released from prison, she has kept her head down. We don't really know too much about her. However, she has been known to post the odd thing on Facebook proclaiming her innocence. And then at this point in 2024, there are rumors that Sherry has passed away. I cannot confirm or deny that. So now I want to end this video focusing on the two victims of today's case, Willine and Vera. And after the horrific murder of Vera, thankfully, Willine was immediately removed from the Brooks household, which I am so thankful for, because can you imagine if Sherry was allowed to keep Willine? And since then, Willine has been adopted by a family who cares and loves for her a lot. And it has been reported that Willine sleeps with a photo of Vera, her mother, next to her bed every single night. And Willine, who I assume is possibly going by a different name, I don't know, she would be 14 years old right now, and I just hope she's doing okay, and I wish her all the best. And now I want to talk about Vera Jo Regal, the tragic victim of today's case. Vera Jo Regal was described as a sweet, loving and charming young woman. She loved jewelry, country music, and she loved spending time with friends. But most of all, in her final months, she loved her little baby girl Willine above everything else in the world. And Vera was taken away from the life that she should have had with Willine in the cruelest of ways. She was taken far, far too soon. She was only 24 years old. And one more heartbreaking thing to add about this case is that when police found Vera's body, they found her clothes, and Vera had a note in her pocket that was addressed to her little baby girl Willine. And the note said, "I love you, Willine. You are a good little baby girl to us. I am glad to be your mommy, and I am glad that I had you on November 4th at 4:16 a.m. 6 pounds, 2 ounces, 19 inches long. Mommy loves you." And the fact that Vera was carrying that note with her, I think that just shows you how much Vera truly cared about Willine. And I am glad that Willine has that note from her mom. She has that piece of her mom with her. And that brings us to the end of today's heartbreaking case. It is one of the cruelest cases I have ever come across. Such a huge miscarriage of justice. And there are just no words to describe how evil Sherry is. But to be honest, all of them. So as always, let me know your thoughts, theories, and opinions on today's case. And don't forget to leave me your case suggestions in the comments down below, because I always want to know what you want to hear next. Thank you again to ExpressVPN for sponsoring today's video, and I'll see you all in my next one. Bye.